So, hi. The book that I have today, or book trilogy, because I do try to read the full trilogy. There's some series where I put it down immediately, but I often find that with young adult paranormal romance particularly, the second book is where things just start to kick off into insanity. I mean, look at Halo, where book one is insanely boring, and then book two just goes off the deep end. So I do try to read the full trilogy, and yeah, this is an odd little trilogy I stumbled upon, and one of the most noteworthy things that we'll immediately notice is the author, who is Meg Cabot. I've never read anything by Meg Cabot before, but I did recognize her. I mean, when I saw this book in a thrift shop, I was like, wait a second, Meg Cabot, that's a name, and that's a name with, a good reputation, even. It was the most generic-looking paranormal romance, but she wrote the Princess Diaries, which became a movie, which I've seen lots of nostalgia for and love for. Yeah, I knew that she was known for, like, she wrote tween girl books, kind of, that were very well known for humor, lightness, fun, like, quirky narration, relatable characters. And I was just stuck there, like, what is she doing writing this book, Abandon? I mean, this book screams of the paranormal boom of the early 2010s, from the design to the title to the entire plot. Yet it's sort of met in the middle by her writing style, making the first book an odd one. In fact, when I first read the first book, I gave it an okay rating. I didn't think much of it, but I actually wound up giving it 3 stars, which I'm a bit of a critical person, so 3 stars is quite good. And that would mean that it's kind of unremarkable and I wouldn't make a video about it. Except I read the rest of the series, and in book 2, like all of these, we sort of skydive off of this cliff of, oh, this is a bad romance, to, oh no, no. So, yeah, I mean, it's this odd mix, the first book and the whole series, of Meg Cabot's signature writing style and the 2010 paranormal romance boom that I'm so infatuated and obsessed with. I mean, there's this mix of this ugly love interest and his very abusive actions, increasingly abusive, to, like, genuinely funny dialogue. There's instant love romance, of course, but then there's these bits of true emotional moments regarding coming of age and, like, being a teen girl. Like, there's these strange, cartoonish, exaggerated trope bits, and then there's this real wit and good writing at points, which makes it such an odd book, just very odd indeed. And again, this is book 1 I'm mostly talking about because book 2 and book 3 by extension go off of the deep end, as one might expect, and become genuinely some of the most, it's odd to say disturbing content because I've covered on this channel some severely really disturbing stuff. I read all sorts of very bizarre books and they cross lines that you didn't even know were lines until you read them. But the thing that makes Abandon and the whole trilogy unique is that the second book in particular, it goes into some places that I've not seen in terms of being an offensive, very bad, very abusive relationship, and how realistically and upsettingly realistically abusive relationships. When you see a lot of, like, para-ro from this time, and I say, like, abusive relationship, we're talking, like, Hush Hush, there's Patch, who stalks the main character, negs her about romance, negs her about her makeup usage, just harassing the main character like that. That's typical. Stalking, watching them sleep. It's hard to say that's typical, but also Twilight sort of set the precedent, and we're like, okay, this is very bad, but you sort of become numb to it. The difference with the love in this one, and this is going to act as my content warning sort of thing, is that the relationship in this series, in book 2 in particular, starts to cross from typical paranormal romance tropes into, like, genuinely very upsetting, abusive relationship portrayal. And especially since it's all portrayed as a very good relationship, this is their one true love, but we are going to see some, like, upsetting levels of gaslighting, manipulation, emotional abuse. It's really, even just recounting and thinking about it, I am genuinely upset by the content in the second book of the series regarding the relationship, because I've read some extreme gore, disturbing content, messed up relationship dynamics, but this is one of those ones that feels so genuinely realistic despite it being a paranormal romance, that it makes it extra disturbing, and I really would put on, like, content warning wise, this book doesn't have much, but that abusive relationship in it is upsettingly realistic. Let's talk about the actual premise of the story, okay? So, the main character is called Pierce, and Pierce, when she was 15, died for about 10 minutes. During this time, she found herself in an underworld where souls were sorted and sent away on boats. There, she saw someone she recognized, a mysterious man she met once when she was 7, who brought a bird back to life. Confused, she tries to explain to this mysterious man that they know each other, and he's instantly delighted to see her. He gives her a diamond necklace and spirits her away to this palace area, telling her she'll get used to it here. Pierce, upon learning that she is dead and this is the afterlife, she freaks out and just manages to escape from the afterlife. She wakes up alive, and everyone tries to tell her this whole mysterious man necklace thing is just a hallucination from her near-death experience. I mean, she was legally dead for a while. But she still has the necklace that the man gave her, and she knows that this was a real encounter she had. She's deeply affected by it, and she starts to act more different. She becomes far more anxious and unfocused than she used to be. Pretty normal reactions to a severe, near-death experience, and the fact that she not only had a near-death experience, but literally was in the afterlife for a while. And then beyond that, that mysterious man starts showing up just in her life, sneaking around in the background, generally protecting her from harm. Pierce is now 17, and she's starting a new school. She lives by a graveyard, which is where she first met the mysterious man, and she tries to find a new start for herself, despite the more frequent meetings she starts to have with this weird man. I keep calling the man a man, but he is actually about 18 or 19. I mean, he's a death deity, so he's kind of immortal, but he's actually only about 200, which, when we look at, like, young adult immortal love interest, 200 is really not that bad. That's surprisingly close in age for this sort of story. And this story is quite obviously a Hades-Persephone myth, but it's not actually just directly Hades-Persephone. This man is not Hades. He is just running this corner of hell, as it were. So the afterlife in this book is separated into, like, little zones and areas, and he just runs the afterlife for this particular island area. And his name is John. Just John, the afterlife deity. And I keep calling him a man, too, because it's worth noting that, as already said, he met Pierce when she was 7. He met her again when she was 15, and now has been stalking her until she's 17. So even though he's kind of like 18 or 19, the age difference is still upsetting, like, considering where we started from. I'd call an 18-year-old who has been alive for 200 years a almost okay age gap for young adult romance, except for the fact that they met when she was 7, which is not cool at all. So, John is no good. I mean, seriously, John is a love interest. I've already mentioned that in book 2 he's gonna get insanely worse, but right off the bat, this is no good of a man. Like, throw him straight in the trash. What is good in the first book is that he is barely in the book. So, he and Pierce very rarely actually speak. He's mostly lurking in the background. Most of the scenes we see of them together are flashbacks. Present timeline, they have, like, 2 conversations before he is, saying, oh, I'm in love with you. So their relationship, as it goes, is an insta-love, which is common, but it's also luckily very little seen in the book. It's all flashbacks, which admittedly, kind of creepy because of the age difference, but at least we don't have to spend too long with this guy. And I mean, that's for the best, because John is terrible. I mean, he's nice to Pierce when he meets her when she's 7, which is a concerning age again, but after she escapes him, when she dies when she's 15, she escapes him in the Underworld, then John spends all of his time brooding and yelling at Pierce, basically. He shows up, tries to save her life, but also is very broody and yelling. He tells her what to do, and he shows up to hurt people who hurt her, without her telling to, of course, and needing her to tell him to stop hurting them. So it's one of those situations that is, again, such a common trope where a love interest will come in to hurt somebody who's hurt the main character, but will go way overboard and needs the main character to be like, please stop, which I find very distasteful. So John, he's very bad. He shows up, he follows her around without her wanting it. He shows no tenderness, he has no positive emotions. As Pierce even says in the book, he has never apologized for how he treated her, as in trying to hold her captive in the underworld. And when he is in the underworld and she's like dead for 15, like when she's 15 and she died, really good English today. When she is dead when she's 15, the thing that he's trying to do where he's like, you'll get used to it here, and gives her a necklace, he's trying to make her his consort. Yeah, he's trying to just be like, well, you know, you and I were in true love, we're destined together. You've died when you were 15, I met you when I was 7, I've been obsessed with you ever since. Congratulations, we're married now. And he never apologized for that, and Pierce does recognize this, but you know, it doesn't matter is the issue, because John doesn't have growth in this series, and Pierce doesn't have growth except in the negative, where she just sort of learns to tolerate John and all of his very bad behaviors. I mean, I had a mild hope that for, like, most of the book, Pierce is very angry at John, that John would have to earn her affection by showing heart and owning up to his behavior, because, again, for most of the book, she's kind of pissed off at him. Makes sense. But rather than it being like a Beauty and the Beast kind of thing where it's like, oh, he has to learn to be better and apologize for his past actions, he never does. I mean, instead, when he's rarely around, he is insisting Pierce does what he says to stay safe, all while not answering her questions and telling her to stay away from him, despite him rarely leaving her alone. So, he sucks, obviously, and it's a shame because I do like the Hades-Persephone myth a lot. And a core part of that myth is that Persephone doesn't like Hades that much. Usually you see that she, like, grows to love him, but it does begin with him stealing her from the earth and other things like that. Like, it's kind of a Beauty and Beast dynamic, the Hades and Persephone thing, in most sort of portrayals of it. You can do so much of the myth. It's a classic, it's beloved for a good reason, and I think it can be a lot of fun, and this book does not engage with it in any way that makes me happy. It only makes me very, very sad. And yeah, okay, so while Pierce isn't being held captive in this book at any point, I mean, she escaped right away when she did die, though John was planning to keep her captive, John never owns up to, explains, or addresses all of the bad vibes around the relationship. He's just this mysterious guy that she thinks she might have hallucinated from when she died, and he will not leave her alone. Pierce doesn't like him, okay, but she still has a lot of these very bad impulses where in the story she compares him to a wild thing, and sometimes she's like, I want to fix him. And yeah, that's such a, again, very bad trope, and we're looking at all of this thing, and I'm just describing how much I friggin' hate John, and all of it comes down to also, Meg Cabot, why did you do this? Meg Cabot, I know that I don't know you well, Miss Cabot, but the fact that you would do this to me, to the worlds, to the young adult market, and write this, why? Okay, so John acts like a complete asshole the entire time. Pierce often hates him, but then gets flashes of like, I could fix him, and he's a wild thing that I must tame. And then he does, like, one nice thing, and she melts, they kiss, and she's just like, I have a boyfriend now, the god of death, I love him. And then the book ends. Like, that, the first book is kind of nothing. I'm skipping, like, a lot of the outside plot, because, let me tell you, it's not very interesting. But yeah, the book just sort of ends where she's like, oh my god, I'm in love now. And that is it. That is it. I mean, he abducts her to the underworld at the very end of the book, but that's it. I did say that I kind of liked the first book a bit, and I kind of wonder if part of that is because when I first read the first book, it was right after I'd finished the Fallen trilogy, which I haven't reviewed on this blog yet, but I will soon, which is a 4-book paranormal romance angel series, and after the relief of finally being done with Fallen, maybe I was a little bit skewed in how much I liked this one. But I did kind of like it, and so if we throw John in the trash like we need to, the reason that I kind of liked this book when I first read it is that the book is kind of well written in a lot of ways. it's not like this vivid, beautiful, lush, overdrawn purple prose that you're used to when you see paranormal romance. It's very frank and fun language. It's like a blast to read a lot of the time. Like, the best moments are easily just Pierce's internal voice and monologue, and she has a bunch of very heartfelt moments, such as, like, one of her friends died, and just her reflection on that, her depression. It's all written really honestly and really compellingly. I don't like contemporary books, but I really enjoyed all of these contemporary real-life moments so much more than anything paranormal, because John is so bad. Like, the surrounding cast and characters were quirky and they felt real, like the whole town, the broader plot. There was something a little bit silly and exaggerated to it, but it felt authentic. I felt genuine emotions by the subplots, which I'm not going to go into. There was actually good writing in there. It felt very honest to like a tween perspective of the time. And that was so refreshing to read, where it was so obvious that Meg Cabot can write and that she can write a good book. She knows this genre and she can write this voice. I did like a lot of it, which was so confusing when every other time John showed up, we were suddenly brought back into this absolutely terrible, terrifying romance situation. It at times felt like Meg Cabot was held hostage and told, you need to write a paranormal romance trilogy, you need to, it's the trend right now. And she was so upset about this that she just, I don't know, wrote the worst possible man she could as some sort of, middle finger to the publishing industry. Anything That I Like Has Left by Book 2, which is the very famed point that I'm sure we're so excited to get to. Book 2 of this series, I always get these names mixed up because, like most paranormal at the time, it is the most generic one-word things possible. So the series actually goes Abandon, Underworld, Awaken, I believe. And I say I believe like I haven't just checked it, because they all just mixed together for me. I thought the first book was called Awaken. It's the third book. The fact that the third book is called Awaken is why I'm wearing a shirt with a sleeping cat on it, because I try to wear something relating to it. But unfortunately, I have nothing relating to Abandon, so we're just going with the sleeping cat Awaken thing. Anyways, Book 2, Underworld. So, I luckily had this really nice break between having to read these, because I got these from library order, which, by the way, if you're reading books and you're buying books, only buy them secondhand or just go to your library and your library can order books in for you. It's really nice and refreshing, and if you're not aware of how convenient a library is, please try going there and finding out how convenient a library is. So I had this great break between Abandon and Underworld where I got to really reflect on it for a bit and remember how bad it is, but also the good parts. And then I open up Underworld and I'm like, oh no, because it is a slog, this book. There is almost nothing happening. The climax is so poorly defined, it's barely a climax. I liked the character voice, I liked the characters, but this book is completely absent of all of that effort she put in to try and make Abandon anything good, anything at all, basically. What Underworld is this heartless, boring story about false information, lying, gaslighting, unsubstantiated threats, and very odd magic. Like, the romance is inhumane, I would call it. I'm gonna call it inhumane. I'm gonna call it a crime against humanity. Why not? Oh gosh. Okay, so the plot of this book, I really don't have much. I've been skipping a lot of the plot because there's nothing. The plot of this book is that Pierce sees her cousin Alex will potentially be in danger in a magic vision, so she and John go to help, and they hang out for a while, and then they return back to the underworld. That is the full plot of it, and yeah, there's nothing. We don't learn much new about the world. We learn John's backstory. He was a ship's captain, and he, killed his father, who was really abusive. We meet some new characters. That's it. There's a drug trafficking plotline. Okay, whatever. Yeah, most of the things that we learn are just sort of side details. There's not direct action. There's not actually something moving the plot forward besides just stumbling around into learning bits of information that nobody cares about. I mean, the only thing that really matters is the relationship. So let's talk about that relationship. It was incredibly difficult for me to power through this book at the start, especially because of how much focus is on the relationship and how wrong that relationship clearly is. Right off the bat, there is an encounter where Pierce eats food in the Underworld. She's still human, and thus hungry, and according to the myth of Persephone, the goddess was only stuck because she ate a pomegranate. We can question her logic there, but Pierce thinks it's perfectly safe for her to eat Underworld food because John is the one who orders food for her, and she loves and trusts John and believes that he would not do anything to hurt her. So when he orders food to the room, she assumes it is safe for me as a human to eat this food. After enjoying her breakfast, John lets her know that eating any food in the Underworld actually binds you there. While it doesn't mean she can never leave, she will not age and be bound to him and this place forever. John states that he thought she knew, which is a very ridiculous thing to presume. For one, John and Pierce are never apart in this book. There's perhaps like one 10-minute window after the food eating thing, but otherwise John is either in the same room or just around the corner. Him thinking that Pierce knows all the strange rules of the Underworld is based on nothing, because she's had no opportunity to learn it, and it's not based directly on Greek mythology. It has its own different thing. It's vaguely based on Greek mythology. It doesn't follow the same rules. So the expectation that she would simply know, that if she ate the food that you gave her, she would be trapped here, is nothing. But perhaps he means for it to be nothing, because we later learn that John is lying to Pierce. Food in the Underworld actually means nothing. This is the first scene, this is the first big fight and event of the book, and it's a lie that her boyfriend made up to try to control her. He even admits that he didn't like how she was freaking out and having second thoughts about cohabitating with him, since she hadn't even been there for 24 hours. So he lied to freak her out and to think she would now be doomed to outlive her family, just so that she would stay put, because she would assume she had no choice but to stay put. There's a similarly bad thing in the first food eating room, scene. When John tells Pierce she'll now outlive, her family, she'll live forever and be bound to the Underworld, she freaks out and asks why he didn't tell her, since now she'll watch her mother grow old and die. And she's close to her mother, she likes her family quite a lot. He says that she has to eat, since otherwise she'd starve, and Pierce states maybe she'd rather starve than risk never being able to see her mother again, or having to watch her mother, slowly die like that. John, at this, grows angry at Pierce, because she has implied that she'd rather die than be with him. Of course, using our basic logic skills and human abilities to recognize anything, we know that she isn't implying that she would rather die than be with him. She's saying she'd rather die than watch her mother die. He's not involved in the equation, but he has put himself in the equation because he's incredibly abusive. He grows so angry at this that he causes small earthquakes and thunder to rumble, which brings Pierce to apologize for something which is, again, exclusively John's fault. John uses thunder and shouting to scare Pierce and prompt her to apologize multiple times. It's the scare tactic to control her, and it really, really turns my stomach. It makes me, queasy when I was reading it, to see her submit and apologize to him every time. She takes things as her fault when they're always him. A good example is in some of the, okay, so I took some notes. I don't have the actual quotes. I have an approximation of some long conversations that they have, which just show how incredibly abusive this relationship is, okay? So, this is from a later scene, and it's Pierce and John talking. This is an approximation with some real quotes in there, but mostly it's me trying to sum up the conversation, okay? Pierce speaking. I love you, but I'm not experienced with dating. I woke up in your arms last night in your bed and did not invite you there. I like you, but we need to take physical relationship stuff slower. I'm 17 and you're my first boyfriend. I'm not ready to date physically. John is angry and he makes thunder boom. How dare you think I slept in the bed with you? You called me in your nightmares. How dare you accuse me of not respecting you? Pierce here is compelled to apologize. You're right. I'm so sorry to offend you. You clearly hate me. You hate being here. You regret coming here. No, I just want a slower pace to our Well, you're stuck here with me forever, idiot. I never told you, but that breakfast I offered you earlier, it binds you here forever. Just thought you'd assume that. So, there. That is legitimately how that conversation goes with the food revelation. And then shortly after, John speaking, if I told you this food would make you immortal, what, would you have not blindly ate it? And Pierce, yeah. You would rather die than be with me? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Oh my god. Oh my god, it's so, I've read so many abusive relationships, but I've never read one that is written exactly like it's trying to show how abusive a relationship is, while not being portrayed in any way as abusive, in any way anything needing to be fixed. Because in this series, John does not have character development. Pierce has character development to become worn down and accept John and his bad behaviors and just become compliant with him. This is not a series that is going to change in any way. By the end of the third book, spoilers, they're just happily together and they're like, oh, we'll have a kid one day. Let's travel a bit. Like, this is not okay in any level, and it is written here almost like it's aware of it, but also there's no condemnation of his actions. He does not apologize or change properly. Pierce constantly apologizes for upsetting John's feelings and not thinking about his hardships, while he never spares a thought for what she is going through. She starts this book sure of her love for him and doesn't really waver in this fact at any point. She appears almost brainwashed by John to forgive him and love him, and is punished when she doesn't. And to add just another reminder, she met John when she was like 6, and he's been following her around and watching her since she was 15. Their bad relationship is put on hold while the plot happens, as it were, but towards the end, they return to the Underworld, and it gets worse, okay? So it gets worse, somehow. Okay, Pierce and John have sex. There's no build-up to this. Nothing about their middle book journey suggests they've been getting closer and are ready for this step. But once they return to the Underworld, they immediately decide to have sex. As they're getting hot and heavy, John reminds Pierce that she said she wanted to take things slow. But she says she's okay now, and, hey, consent is good. However, he then says, what about the consequences? She assures him that she isn't worried about consequences. Pierce believes he is referring to pregnancy, as apparently there's no condoms in the afterlife. And Pierce recently learned on her, one scene that she was away from John that she can't become pregnant in the Underworld. So they then have sex. A bit after this, John reveals that sex is the real pomegranate, as it were. He was lying about the food thing. Food doesn't bind you here, but having sex with him means she is now non-aging and stuck with him forever. Which is... It is a miscommunication, kind of. John did kind of try to check it out, but I'd very much argue he did not try hard enough. Why would he assume that Pierce knows anything about the rules of this afterlife since he hasn't told her, and he has been with her non-stop for this entire book? When Pierce says yes to the consequences, he really should have double-checked. This is not something that's based on Greek mythology. Again, it's not like... it's not based on Greek mythology. There's no source she could have learned this from at any point in her life. And yet he thinks that when she says, oh, I'm fine with the consequences, it's very important because this is an irreversible thing. He was lying about the fruit thing, but he saw how upset he was. He saw how upset Pierce was with the fruit thing. Assuming that Pierce knows and has come to terms with being immortal and stuck in the Underworld in the day that the rest of the plot has happened is ridiculous. And in a true John Pierce fashion, their conversation on the subject involves John blaming Pierce and Pierce accepting the blame and apologizing for not knowing something as ridiculous as sex will trap you here with me forever, which John knew and Pierce had no way of knowing. To paraphrase the scene again, Oh my god. John speaking. I love you, Pierce. You're so good and make me want to be good. I was afraid, hence the food, fruit, curse thing, you would leave when you realized I'm not a very good person. Pierce tries to say something, but she just thinks that how she'd never leave him and doesn't care that he killed his abusive father by accident, whatever. You nearly died yesterday, so I wanted to show how I loved you, hence having sex. It went further than I expected, but you didn't stop me, even though I told you we could slow down. You did. You're right. John here leverages his basic good manners, checking if Pierce is ready for sex and want to slow down or not, as an excuse for why he had sex with her and doomed her to an eternity with him, despite the fact she didn't know the consequences. It's such an unhealthy, nasty relationship. It's really upset. As you can probably tell as I shake my hands like this, it is genuinely really upsetting because unlike a lot of these paranormal romances I see, which have, like, stalking is real, people negging is real, bullying, all of that is real things that affect people. Those are all abusive things that shouldn't really be portrayed in fiction how they are as, like, these idealized things. Paranormal romance is a real thing, with the romance being often really, really problematic, and it definitely does have an impact on young readers. Like, it's not something I'm going to break down and cover here, but I think that we really should consider the fact that a lot of people who read these, like, kinds of books, what young adult fiction is for ages like 13 or so, kids read them when they're way younger than that, and kids who read them at that, your comprehension just isn't very good when you're like 11 reading a relationship like this. It's not very good when you're 13, frankly, because teenagers are great. It's very cool. Good for you guys. I remember being a teenager. It's cool, but also your comprehension for a lot of things is based on your life experience. And when you're like 13 reading things like this, you lack a lot of the life experience that, you know, teaches you what's okay in real life. And when you read it in fiction like this, and if it's portrayed in these very, like, flattering ways, it can have an impact. And I'm not just saying that like I'm trying to protect kids from sin in this really specific way. I'm saying that as somebody who read a lot of books like this. I didn't read this exact kind of book, but I sure saw a lot of things in fiction that I just accepted as relatively normal. It just gets in your head, basically, when really I was picking up some pretty bad lessons that I wish that I didn't. It's kind of normal for teens, but we still should keep an eye out for this kind of thing where the whole message is, you know, this man is incredibly abusive, he lies, he manipulates, but it's okay, and Pierce is only rewarded with happiness, as it were, by agreeing, by complying with all of his incredibly bad actions that are written so true to life of actual abusers. In turn, I have a lot less to say about book 3, because not much really changes. I mean, look, I'm gonna make a point. Like, Awaken, book 3, is such a non-event, I'm not confident there was much for me to remember in the first place. Like, book 3 of a trilogy, it delivers on the typical era thoroughfare. Like, there's a long fight at the end, a happy ever after ending, obligatory promise of marriage and children, and very little else. There's this bit about a Greek god possessing a family line and how his giveaway is based on polo shirts, but that's about it. There's this, like, the abuse level goes down a bit in this book, but literally it's only because John is dead for half of this book. And so while John is dead, the really abusive relationship, you'll never believe this, it's not in here as much. But it's still a very boring book overall, and there's not much to discuss about the plot. I've kind of entirely skated talking about the plot of this series, besides just the romance. I am going to cover it for some reason only for book 3, mostly because book 3 has enough really silly, bizarre plot things that I think it's kind of funny, and book 1 and 2 just didn't have that as much. So, Pierce is hanging out in the Underworld, and a hurricane is about to hit her island home on Earth, so the whole plot of this takes place in about a week. There are the Furies, who are angry. Furies in this book are souls who are angry about where they've been stored in the afterlife. And they've been chasing John down, and lead him to crash a boat and he appears to be dead. Very exciting. Pierce latches on to a random idea that one of John's underworld friends bring up, which is that the Greek god Thanatos might be holding on to John's soul, and that's why John hasn't miraculously healed from his death, because he's not supposed to be able to die. Pierce thus sets out to try and save John based on this hearsay, as well as buy some new boats for the underworld. There's a long plot that involves buying boats for the underworld, which literally means buying real-life high-end cruise ships to send down to the underworld somehow so that souls can be sorted in the afterlife. Pierce is also given a whip just by the underworld, which she is inexplicably perfect as using as a weapon. She's never used weapons before, but she has a magic whip. And it's later revealed that this whip is the same one that John's abusive dad used to whip him with. For some reason. So Pierce vows revenge on the Furies, and to do this, she returns to Earth to regroup with her cousin and some random friends and, human people, whatever. They bumble around for a bit, especially as her cousin has a whole subplot where he's obsessed with proving that the town, mean kids' evil families are involved in drug trafficking. And at one point, a, very evil teacher from Pierce's old life when she was 15 shows up. His dead body shows up possessed by a fury, but then lightning strikes a tree and kills him, and we later learn that John was controlling a lightning bolt to do that. This is just the complete aside, but I feel like telling you random plot details like this is the best way to experience this book, because nobody should ever read this trilogy. You should especially never reach book 3. So the team, on their very vague quest, heads to a hurricane party at the evil mean kid's house, where there's this mystery drink being served, and again, I only need to exposit on how ridiculous this is. So these teens are drinking a mix of vodka, Kool-Aid, and whatever pills they find in their parents' medicine closets. And we need to just cover how insanely deadly that would be. Most medications cannot get you high. I've been on a lot of medications. I'm on a lot of medications. Very few of them have the side effect of getting you remotely high. Beyond the fact that, a lot of medications are not immediate acting. So if you took them one off, you're not going to have any effect. And most pills don't work when they're dissolved in liquid first. Usually you have to swallow them. And, of course, you can't mix pretty much any medication with alcohol. So, and of course, this is an overdose waiting to happen. This is the most deadly thing that I've ever seen just casually brought up. It's like you walk into the party and they're like, hey, it's mystery drink. We put some prescription pills in vodka. Drink up, everybody. And everyone's just completely drunk and high and loving it. That everybody at that party has overdosed and died. You would become extremely ill from this, and then you would die. Anyways, during this party where no one is dying, Pierce confronts one of the teen bullies and realizes he's wearing a Ralph Lauren polo shirt, and the little logo of a guy on a horse looks like a picture of Thanatos on a horse that she'd seen earlier this day. Again, not knowing for sure that Thanatos even exists, she concludes that Thanatos is possessing this bully and makes out with him, the bully, so she can press her fury-killing magic gemstone to his skin. And this works. Thanatos is killed, the god of death is killed, which frees John back to life. So, John and Pierce then head to Pierce's house, and she ends up revealing to her parents that John is a death deity. They take it pretty well, though Pierce's dad keeps trying to recruit him as a business partner / military weapon. Pierce's super rich dad is able to just buy some boats to teleport to the underworld, and Pierce runs to the cemetery. This is where the final battle happens, and it's just a bunch of, fury-possessed people trying to do murder. Nobody has guns or anything for some reason. It's over really quickly, and the Furies are expelled from the world, problem solved. Cue happy ending, with the extra bonus that Pierce and John are going to vacation sometimes. Why not? And that they also could conceive a child while up there, because that's what this relationship needs. So there isn't really much to this book. I mean, it's a pretty thick book, and the plot details there, like I just said, are kind of quite funny out of context, but it's honestly a very empty. I had to double check while writing the review for a lot of it, and yeah, there's nothing in this. There's just nothing. is a really weird trilogy. I can't tell what it is. My honest thought of it is that Meg Cabot, I don't actually know her reputation. I don't know if she's considered to be a good author. I've just only heard that she's well regarded. She wrote the Princess Diaries, which is a very beloved, like, film franchise, and I assume book series too. And I kind of feel like maybe she just had a contract to fill with this series. Because the thing is that paranormal romance, this is like 2013 or whatever, it's a hot genre. Everybody is writing it. She writes teen books. She's been writing great teen books before the paranormal romance boom. I highly suspect that somebody was like, you need to write a paranormal romance series to fit in with all of this. You're like the queen of the tween novel. Get in on this trend. And I don't think that she was that passionate about it, because the end result is one of the most forgettable trilogies, except for the most abusive relationship I've ever read. So, I mean, congratulations in that way. It's stuck in my mind. Not the characters or the plot or the story or anything about it, but that romance is stuck with me. So, in some ways that's lasting.